Today's story is Anomaly Part 3, Phantom, by RandoCalrissian. Jennifer was crouched over in pain. The breaths she took were staggered and shallow, as the wooden stake had pierced one of her lungs. However, through her pain and her shallow breaths, she managed to mutter out a laugh. It was light and barely even audible. "When?" she said, well wincing in pain. Her voice was shallow, almost as if she had gotten the wind knocked out of her. "When did you find out?" The anomaly just stared at her and smirked. "I've known from the moment you arrived," he said, slightly laughing between each syllable. "After all, you bought all that bullshit about having to wear a mask once the sky turned blood red, not even bothering to question the fact that High Command never mentioned that once," he said, slowly pacing around her while raising his index finger. "You were trying so hard to fit in that you didn't even notice that none of the survivors had masks on," he said with a chuckle. "I figured that they had just adapted," she said, uncontrollably coughing between every few words. The anomaly stopped. He put his index finger down and stared at her. There was no smile, no expression on his face at all. He just stared at her. His deep blue eyes pierced her soul. "Bullshit," he muttered to himself softly. "And, well, let's not forget," he said, still staring at her with his deep blue eyes, "the one thing that you did that truly gave away your identity." "And what might that be?" she hissed, her breath still very shallow. "You see, when I conduct debriefings, I don't mention the fact that vampires can be killed by stabbing a wooden stake through their hearts," he said, while one side of his lips curled up into a smile. "Yet, you did just that, to save my life thinking that it would gain my trust. However, unbeknownst to you," he said, now wearing a full smile, "you were really signing your own death warrant." Hunched over, she looked up at him. She began to smile as well. "I really have to give it to you," she said, still coughing, her breathing still shallow and painful. "The prey outsmarts the predator." After she said that, he immediately threw his head back with a sarcastic chuckle. "Oh, Miss Knox, the fact that you think that you're the predator in this game amuses me," he said while kneeling down to her height. "This is my world, my domain. I am the apex predator. You're not even worthy enough to be my prey," he said, still making eye contact with her. His expression was cold and lifeless. "You're nothing more than a patch of grass, rooted in the ground that I just happened to stumble upon," he said almost in a whisper. "That's strong talk," she said, her expression matching his. "So, just kill me then. Be done with it." "Kill you?" he asked, standing back up. "Oh, no, he said, sounding empathetic, although it was clearly sarcasm. "I'm gonna keep you alive for just a little bit longer. After all, I need information." "What kind of information?" she hissed while looking at him. "Simple," he said as he began to pace around her once more. "You see, your kind has plagued Earth since the 1800s, he said, raising his index finger again. "And all I need to know is, where did you come from? And more importantly, why did you come from there?" She looked up at him. She began to snarl as her eyes filled with hate. He stopped pacing to look down at her. "So, here's how this is going to go. I ask you 2 simple questions, you answer honestly, and I end your suffering. However, if you answer with a lie, I will increase your pain. The choice is yours," he said. He then knelt back down to make eye contact with her. "Fuck you," she snarled. He gave a deep sigh through his nostrils, looking away from her for only a moment. "Wrong answer," he said, pushing the wooden stake even deeper into her lungs. She screamed in pain. "All you have to do is answer my questions honestly, and the pain, it'll stop," he said. He rested his hand on her shoulder. "Now, I know this hurts, and I'm aware the chemical makeup of wood is poisonous to your kind. He tilted his head ever so slightly. Although she was in pain, she did not speak. She just stared at him and spat in his face. He wiped the spit off and drove the wooden stake even further into her lung. Again, she screamed, but this time through the screams, he could make out a word. "Mercury!" She winced in pain. He took his hand off the stake and immediately stood back up. He paced around for a moment, caressing his chin with his thumb and index finger. "Mercury? That doesn't make any sense," he muttered to himself. "It's way too close to the sun. Surely there's no way they could exist." He cut himself off and turned his gaze back toward her. "Unless Mercury doesn't spin?" He asked, to no one in particular. "It just stays still, orbits around the sun. That's why the sun's rays are so harmful to your kind. That's why you came to Earth," he said, looking down at her. "Your planet?" she said while coughing up a black, gelatinous ooze from her throat. "It's one of the few planets that has a day and night cycle." She continued to cough. The black ooze was all over her chin and uniform. "Its kind had adapted to the sunlight. We found when we took on their identity, the sun didn't harm us." She coughed, this time falling to the ground on her hands. She no longer had any strength, not even to kneel. "We only do what we do to survive." He stopped dead in his tracks and looked at her. It was as if he wasn't even breathing anymore. "What did you just say?" he asked. It was the first time she had ever heard fear in his voice. "We're not evil like you think we are," she said, her breath shallow as she continued to cough up the black ooze. We're just doing what we need to survive." Her voice was shaking with her breath shallow. Again, all he could do was stare at her. Suddenly, out of nowhere, he pulled the wooden stake out of her lung and stabbed her through the heart. His breaths were heavy for a moment. He remembered the plead of the detective all those years ago. He pondered for a moment, his mind racing. Could that creature had really been just trying to survive? No ill will towards anyone that it encountered? Just trying to avoid the harmful rays of the sun? No, he said to himself. They're evil, and they all deserve to die. Shortly after killing the imposter, he walked back to his team. "Ready to go?" Margot asked in her thick Russian accent. "You can drop the accent, Rachel. She's dead," he said, walking up to her. "Oh, thank God," Rachel proclaimed, finally able to use her real American accent. "Thank God indeed," Joey said, rolling his eyes. "If I had to hear you drift off into German one more time, I think I would have shot myself." Rachel stared at him and looked back at the Anomaly. "Do I really have to take this shit from a pre-recorded hologram?" The Anomaly looked at both Johnson and Joey and said, "J1.2 and J1.3. Terminate transmission. Termination code 8.2.2.4 Jaguar." The two men standing next to Rachel that had been seeming so lifelike suddenly disappeared into nothing. "They're right, you know," he said, picking up his gun that he had dropped on the ground and putting it in his holster. "Right about what, Arthur?" she snapped. "You need to work on your accents," he said, turning back around to look at her. "You almost blew your cover several times." "Oh, piss off, Arthur," she said, rolling her eyes at him. "I'm sick and tired of doing this stupid accent every time we get a new recruit." "Why? You have a problem with protecting your team?" he asked, this time with a more frustrating tone and walking closer to her. "That's not what I meant, Arthur," she said, matching his aggravation in her tone. "It's your damn paranoia that I can't stand. Every single time we get a new recruit, you get 2 pre-recorded holograms and me. You tell me to fake an accent and a name and keep close eye on whoever High Command sends up here, in fear they might be a vampire and try to kill all of us," she said, breathing heavily. "Don't you see how ridiculous that is?" "Ridiculous?" he asked quietly to himself. "Ridiculous?" he repeated this time, shouting at the top of his lungs. "I'm trying to save the human race from extinction," he proclaimed in frustration. "Oh, bullshit. You just don't trust anyone. It's that lack of trust that got Sarah killed," she yelled. "Do not bring her into this," he hissed through his teeth. "Why not, Arthur?" she asked. "Blame yourself for what happened?" "I said stop," he muttered in anger. "You sent her to her death," she hissed. "Stop!" Arthur repeated, angrily hissing through his teeth. "It's your fault she was overwhelmed. It's your fault she was torn to pieces by zombies," she yelled, tears now streaming down her face. "At least I was trying to warn them, to save their lives, but your pride got in the way. You never loved her," she yelled. "She was my daughter," he yelled at her face. "And she was my sister," she yelled back. "If you would just let me..." She paused. Tears started to stream down her face as she hung her head low. "If you would have just let me go with them, I wouldn't have to walk through the pain of losing my sister." She looked back up at him, her eyes red. Her eyelashes stuck to her face from the tears pouring from her eyes. "But you didn't trust me. I could have been one more person to help them, and even if I died, I would have died with her." Arthur stared at her. Tears began to swell from his eyes. The memories of his beautiful daughter flooded back into his mind. "Rachel," he said, turning away from her. He walked only a short distance away. "I don't think you quite understand how many children I have buried, how many families I have outlived," he said, turning back to her. "I didn't send you because I didn't trust you. The reason I didn't send you is because I refused to bury you," he said, turning back around to look at her. Her eyes met his, and she stared at him for a moment and then asked, "Why didn't you let me warn them?" "It was too late," he said, softly hanging his head low. "You would have been killed too." After he said this, she ran up to him and hugged him. "I love you, Father." Father. Something she had not called him since she was a little girl. Tears began to well in his eyes. He couldn't respond. He didn't know how to respond. For as long as he could remember, she had only referred to him as Arthur. For as long as he remembered, she always said that she hated him, and she wished that she could be free from this curse. The curse of being his daughter. So he hugged her back and held her close and gently whispered, "I know, Rachel." When they had recomposed themselves, she departed back to base. He assured her before she left that he would follow shortly behind. After she was out of sight, he sat down on a log, pulling back the collar of his uniform to reveal a vampire bite. He had just started to squeeze the venom out when he heard a voice he hadn't heard in years. But it was a voice all too familiar nonetheless. "Do you believe in evil?" Arthur stopped what he was doing. He sat upright. A quiet smile began to spread across his lips. "Detective," he said, slowly turning around. "Huh, incredible," the detective muttered to himself. "Your body is able to heal itself so fast. The venom didn't even have time to incapacitate you," the detective said in awe, and yet there was a hint of disappointment in his voice. "But not fast enough to counter the hallucinations that come shortly after." Arthur stared at the detective, his smile still present. "I've been bitten by vampires tens of thousands of times since your death," he said, his eyes scanning the detective thoroughly, as he was trying to become absolutely certain that the detective was a hallucination. "Yet not one has ever appeared as you." Arthur's smile started to fade away. In contrast, the detective started to wear a smile of his own. "Up until this point, I was a suppressed memory, something meant to be forgotten. But something happened, and it made you remember me," the detective said, his smile growing unnaturally wide. Arthur could see his animalistic teeth connecting to his black, oozing gums. "It made you remember your biggest regret," the detective said, laughing with each syllable. "My life is full of regrets, detective. You are not one of them," he said, turning away from the detective and walking back toward his jeep. "Really? Because I'd argue to say that I'm your only regret." Arthur stopped. He turned back around to look at the phantom and stared at the venom-induced hallucination. "And what makes you say that, detective?" he asked, making eye contact with the phantom. "You thought of the question that your colleague, what was her name, Susan?" the hallucination asked with a smirk. "You thought of her question every single day since my death, yet you have never let it question your own morality until now," the phantom proclaimed. He began to slowly pace around Arthur. "You're starting to believe that I may not have been evil." No, please, you killed an innocent man, Arthur said as his gaze followed the hallucination. How was I supposed to know he was innocent? The Phantom asked. How was I supposed to know he was a good man? How were you supposed to know that I was evil? The Phantom questioned. So, ask yourself, are you any more moral than I was? I don't have to, Arthur stated. I'm not about to argue my morality with a ghost. And what makes you think I'm a ghost? The Phantom said quietly. All of a sudden, the Phantom started to charge Arthur. Arthur pulled out his pistol and pointed it at the detective's head. Then, like wind blowing away shreds of paper, the Phantom disappeared without a trace. Hey there, friends. I hope you all enjoyed this video. This was Anomaly 3 by RandoCalrissian. This is apparently part 3 of 7 total, so hopefully you guys are looking forward to the rest. This is a fantastic series, in my opinion, and I am excited to keep it going. So, thank you to RandoCalrissian for writing this and letting me narrate it. I do appreciate it. Thank you for listening. If you listened to this today and thought, I kind of like this guy, I think I'll subscribe to his channel. Well, guess what? That means you join the Nevermore. To join the Nevermore, all you had to do was hit that subscribe button and the bell icon next to it if you felt like you wanted to do that as well. You can support the growth of the Nevermore by visiting any of the links down below, any of my social media links, or supporting me on Patreon or Ko-fi. Always appreciated, always optional, but thank you to everyone who does any of those things. I hope you are all having a fantastic day today. If you're not, try to reflect on why you're not, and maybe just, I don't know, try to make it a little better if you can. That's the whole thing, right? Just gotta reflect and make things better. Alright, everyone. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, much love and sleep well.